All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making it back from dinner. Coming up next, we have Amy Sturgis talking about the Captain Powers story. Isn't there a subtitle to it as well? Rights Under Attack. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this off to Amy and start up the audio-visual portion of our presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I want to talk this evening about a show that was 20 years in the making, 20-year anniversary this year. To start it off, let me just set the stage with a little advertisement. If this were August 1987 and you were watching your local television station, this is what you might have seen.
My new cake mix.
We have the power on. Power on.
And it's so delicious.
I think we're getting through, Captain. What year? 1987, I think. Try it. Hello. To anybody watching, this is Captain Power. Jonathan Power. Do you read? We have a situation here. The year is 2147. Human life is threatened by biodreads. They follow a Lord Dread. I need your help. I have instructions. Please pay attention. Weekly program transmissions on TV begin September. If you have the power jet XT7, the XT7, you can fire invisible beams at enemy targets on these transmissions. Score or be hit. Warning, the TV show will fire back in... Will fire back. Score or be hit. Do you understand? The power of the future is in your hands. My next message is September... Come in. Is anybody there? This is Captain Power. Captain...
What that advertisement was announcing was the beginning of a new television series called Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. I want to do two things tonight. First, I want to talk about why this series... Oops. Actually, I guess I should use this, shouldn't I? It's not hooked up? Okay. So I should be... To advance it here?
No, you're using the other button.
All right. Gotcha. 2 points about this series. First, why it was one of the most innovative television shows really ever, both in its writing and in its use of technology. It was remarkably ahead of its time, and we really haven't seen anything exactly like it since. But I also want to talk about why it was ironic that the show ended as it did, because the show was a dystopian show about humans enslaved, their rights not only under attack, their rights taken away, and the subversive fight for freedom. And essentially the show was taken off the air because of, in large part, political pressure from both sides of the spectrum. There was a charge against Captain Power from the right, at the same time joined by a liberal charge from the left, and the show was really the victim of political pressure. So really the larger story of Captain Power is about rights being under attack. Even though the show itself was creating a fictional dystopia, it ended up, in a way, playing out its own story. Not only on the airwaves, but in, ultimately, congressional hearings. Okay, so first of all, what was Captain Power? Does anyone remember in September 1987? Some of you weren't born then. Okay, there's one other person who remembers this show. Captain Power began on September 20th, 1987. There were 22 episodes. It was created by J. Michael Straczynski, who would go on to make Babylon 5, to write comics, to do other television series, Jeremiah, Crusade. This was Straczynski's first step into the television arena. As you saw, the commercial was playing to a young audience, yet the writing was for an older audience. It was a paradox in that it really played to both camps. It was about a dystopian future set in the year 2147, in which humanity had lost, essentially, the war and was attempting to come back. The soldiers of the future who worked with Captain Power were attempting to put humanity back in its original position on top of the food chain, as it were, because humanity was getting set to be an extinct species. It was important not only because it was an interesting story, well told, but also because it was one of the first shows to really successfully blend CGI and live action. It made it an incredibly expensive series to put on, but half of the main characters were CGI, Captain Power and the soldiers of the future were live action, and this was really unique in its time, and it created some particular dynamics with the show and with the storytelling, because they had this different imaginative way to visualize the characters. Even more importantly, the series was created as a partnership between Landmark Entertainment and Mattel. The reason is there was interactive technology, as you saw in the advertisement, actually demonstrated for you. The characters could fire at people who had the right toy. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, that toy, that jet. And you could be hit. Conversely, you could fire at the show and hit characters on the show, actually just mechanical ones. But the opportunity to have this interactive technology with the story, you were part of the story element, you were actually helping Captain Power. You could play the series as a game, essentially. After this came out the oh-so-cool VHS tapes that had also separate storylines for Captain Power, and those were interactive as well. So depending on your enthusiasm for the show, you could actually arm yourself and take part in the storyline. This was the first time this had been done, and it was really remarkable, the technology that had been created particularly for this aspect of the storytelling. It's also important because the critical response to the show was quite amazing. Now, you saw the people in the goofy armor, right, doing the little power-on thing, and suddenly they had their outfits on. It was, in a sense, a well-kept secret for a time, because it seemed there was this childlike side to it. However, the critical response quickly drew in adult viewers to the show. Siskel and Ebert did a special look at Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, gave them 2 thumbs up, said it was remarkable work of dystopian storytelling, highly recommended it. In 1988, it was nominated for a Daytime Emmy. It was for makeup, but it was still nominated for a Daytime Emmy. In 1988, it was also nominated for the Gemini Awards in Canada for Best Costume Design, but also for Best Performance by a Lead Actress for Jessica Steen, who was one of the Soldiers of the Future. Best Photography, Best Production Design, and significantly, Best Writing for J. Michael Straczynski for one of the scripts for this show. It won the Outstanding Technical Achievement Award that year, the Gemini Awards. And in 1989, it won the International Monitor Awards for Best Audio Design. So you see, the critical response there wasn't just for the technical aspects, although that was there, but also for the writing and the acting in the show. It's an anomaly, this child's show that has this remarkable writing and this remarkable acting. Indeed, several of the actors in the show went on to larger fame afterwards. So it's interesting things going on there. let me tell you a bit more about the show before I tell you why it's ironic that the show died the death that it did. It's going to be the 20th year anniversary of the show, and I think it's important that we remember what the show was actually doing. If you watched an episode of Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future, its title really didn't help, did it? You hear that and you don't think this is going to be deep, engaging adult material, right? Yet it was. But, you've got the whole Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future thing to get over before you can even get there. The story was designed by J. Michael Straczynski and other writers on the show as a 4-season arc. Going into it, they knew the beginning, the middle, and the end, how this was going to unfold. Straczynski would later in his career discover again what happens when you get canceled before your arc is finished. But this was his training ground with Captain Power. If you tuned in, the first things you heard, besides Power On, that didn't help either, Power On, but it explained itself thusly. Earth, I don't have the deep TV man voice. It's really cool in the deep TV man voice. You're going to have to just imagine it. Earth 2147, the legacy of the Metal Wars, where man fought machine and machines won. Biodreads, monstrous creations that hunt down human survivors and digitize them. Volcania, center of the Biodread Empire, stronghold and fortress of Lord Dread, feared ruler of this new world order. But from the fires of the Metal Wars arose a new breed of warrior, born and trained to bring down Lord Dread and his Biodread Empire. They were soldiers of the future, mankind's last hope. Together they formed the most powerful fighting force in Earth's history. Their creed, this is important, to protect all life. Their promise, to end Lord Dread's rule. Their name, Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. That set up the dystopian world. While you were hearing this, you were seeing smoldering ruins of buildings, right? And you were seeing these automaton creature cyborg things. Actually, they weren't cyborgs. They were just mechanical, walking down the street in a threatening manner, and people being digitized, which I expect is a bit like being microwaved. They scream, and then they sort of scatter. So it's kind of scary. But what was the real story behind this little introduction? Very interesting, actually. The idea was that by 2130, the different countries had created things, these mechanical android things, that fought wars for them. It was very neat. It was very nice. They were like smart bombs with legs. And they would go fight each other, and it became a situation where war didn't cost human lives, really. And so wars went on all the time. So you had a group of scientists who got together and said, well, if we could create this supercomputer that could stop all of these mechanical warriors from fighting each other, we could end war forever, and that would be a good thing. Two of the main scientists were Stuart Power, the father of Captain Power, and his associate, Lyman Taggart. They get to the point they figure out exactly what the supercomputer needs to be, and Taggart goes bad, becomes Lord Dread. This supercomputer and Lord Dread kind of blend, so that Lord Dread ends up being this sort of cyborg thing, half human, half machine. And instead of their original design, which was ending war, they end up, all of the machines come under the power of Lord Dread and this overmind supercomputer, and they decide they'd rather put themselves in power and rule the world instead. Rather than giving everyone peace, they would just give the world themselves and their new world order. So you have these two scientists, great idea, one goes bad. And so Dr. Power and his son, Captain Power eventually, try to fight this, but they lose. And so by the time you get to 2147, you have this cyborg guy and his supercomputer running all of these mechanical things. And their plan is to remake the world for machines. Humans are just going to mess it up. So we get rid of the humans, and we just have a world of the machine. They really, really do win the Metal Wars. And so everything that's left is the smoldering ruins of cities everywhere. And there are a few people who think actually humanity was pretty good, and that machines under this horrible guy, and it's important to remember that it was a human who started all of this, that's not the way to go. And so they're fighting for humanity's future. So the story arc is this really underdog story of humanity trying to fight back after the world has been taken over by these mechanical creatures. The characters were not what you think of as superhero characters. Dr. Power immediately dies, but not before creating these special power suits. And the power suits, each one is a special kind of suit made for only one person, meant to enhance that person's gifts. So we had these nice little shiny things, and when they say power on, they get the power suit, right? But the characters themselves were very individual, very unique, and rather dark. Captain Power is fighting the fight his father started, and is basically attempting to make up for the mistake he felt his father had made. You have his mentor figure, the oldest member of the team, whose wife and children were killed in this entire war. And so the only thing he really has left is being the father figure to Captain Power, because he was buddies with Captain Power's father. You've got a character whose entire family was wiped out when he was a child. He's an orphan. He has nothing to do but fight. He has nothing to lose. You have a character, interesting, that was an escapee from a genetic engineering experimental colony, which, interestingly enough, was called Babylon 5. And that colony was the government's attempt to breed super warriors. They were bulked up, they were powerful, they were angry, they were aggressive, and they were going to go out and fight the wars. But then everything sort of changed, and they went with machines instead, and they were stuck with all of these people who had been bred to be super warriors with no war to fight. And so they fought each other. And this particular one character got away, but was haunted by the idea that he was too aggressive and would hurt people, and he didn't want to do that. So he's sticking with people that will help him fight, for the right kind of battle. And you have the young woman of the team who was raised in what's essentially the Nazi youth, the Dread youth, taught to despise her own species. And they capture her and basically put her through detox, and eventually bring her around to appreciating that human life is actually worth living and worth saving. Nuanced, interesting characters fighting in all of this. And Lord Dread himself, his human half fighting with this computerized half, tied up with regret and concern. Still, also, very interesting character. The themes are particularly interesting. War is hell is obviously one of them. The entire story started with war attempting to be ended. And the war that Captain Power fights is really quite awful, and we see that on a weekly basis. We see characters die. We see characters get tortured. We see the fact that humanity is fighting only in this sort of last valiant death throw, and you're never really sure that they're going to win. And in the end, we never know if they win or not, but it doesn't look particularly good. Unintended consequences. The fact these scientists had really good intentions doesn't matter at all. They really screwed things up for the entire world. The value of what is human. The fact that it really is better to have people who are fallible than machines that take orders is given over and over again. It's interesting, one episode, Flame Street, was very clearly pulling on William Gibson's Neuromancer and other works of cyberpunk. You see for the first time on television an idea of an internet. They just called it the net. They had characters plug in and go into cyberspace. Very interesting stuff. And cyberspace looked very much like William Gibson described it, with sort of lava lamps and neon lights and everyone kind of, virtual. Very interesting. But this is incredibly early on, if you think in the development of these kinds of concepts, to be on television in this way. Ironically, the two main themes of the show are things that the opponents of Captain Power really needed to hear. Though if they'd heard it, they probably wouldn't have agreed with it. But I think this is at the heart of the show, and it really is important to the theme of PhreakNIC this year. First, freedom is worth fighting for. The characters give up everything in order to protect what very little they have. For example, a radio station that still works, that still can play some music to people, becomes this ongoing ingredient, because it was so important that they could have a means of communication, of sharing things that were beautiful and true and human with the few remaining survivors, without being shut down by Lord Dread. They fight over and over again, knowing that they really don't have a chance, but that's part of the human spirit, and it's worth giving the ultimate price for if there's a chance to carve out some sphere of liberty for themselves and for others. And the second one, the big one that comes out of this, is that technology is amoral. It's not good, it's not bad. People are good and bad, and people can make good or bad use of technology. But technology itself is not evil. Technology just is. So you have two scientists who are working to originally to end war. One scientist actually has much more personal ambition than altruistic motives, and he uses what they create in a bad way. But Captain Power's father, the other scientist, creates things like the power suits that allow people to go and protect the last vestiges of humanity. He creates something called Mentor that keeps all of the knowledge, accumulated knowledge of humanity alive during this time. Things like medicine, things like geography. It's not just machines bad. They're incredibly good machines, good computers, good things that happen, but it's because people use them in those ways. Technology itself isn't to be feared. The motivations of people are to be feared and to be weighed as immoral or moral. Then there's also the question of the intended audience of the show. I've already kind of touched on that. It was, as I said, named Captain Power and the Soldiers of the Future. They had their little power-on suits, and they worked with this marketing with the toys and such. Put in a children's time slot and sold to children. However, the writing included things like sexual relations between the characters, very clearly major plot components in several episodes. It had things like torture, had things like death. Characters that we liked died and really stayed dead. It had the whole dystopian thing going on. The good guys weren't winning, which led critics like Siskel and Ebert and others to say, this is a show that adults need to be watching. It's written for adults. It just happens to be in the package that would be appreciated by children. It actually became, for a while, a very successful family show. If you want to watch, the human race being killed off, it's a good family fun. Because adults could enjoy it, and kids also found something for themselves as well. So it was successful as a crossover like that. But there always was this sort of schizophrenic quality of, who are we aiming this for? How do we advertise this? Where do we put it? What do we do with it? And the people in charge really never did figure that out. Which brings us to the question of interactivity. You saw in that subversive moment of breaking through the cake mix ad in order to make this plea for help from 2147 that you could help Captain Power by getting involved with the story. How did this happen? Well, there were lots of things that eventually came out of Mattel for Captain Power, but the most important was the XT-7 jet. The XT-7 jet is what actually fired in the show. It is a jet. It is not a gun. That's important. What you would do is you would buy this, and for a promised 3 minutes every episode, not necessarily 3 minutes all in the same time, but for a total, at the end of the episode of 3 minutes, you would have the chance to go at one of the mechanical bad guys who was, thwarting humanity. They had little red glowy chests, and I have no idea how this works, so don't ask me, but I just know it does. They had little red glowy chests, and they might be, kicking the ass of the bad guys, or they might be just walking by, you just didn't know, or soaring by because some of them could fly. And if you aimed this XT7 up at the little red glowy spot on their chest, if you hit first, if you fired first, you would basically pull their power source, and they'd go, eh, right? They were mechanical. This is important. You weren't killing them. They weren't alive. They had their power on, no pun intended, and you took their power away, right? That's it. If you lined up and you didn't hit them first, it registered with the XT7 jet that you had been hit. If you were hit a number of times in succession, the little hatch would pop up and your little person would be ejected. This is important too. Your ship would be crippled. You were saved. Okay? Just note to self there. Nobody was dying, but if you could pull the power source on all of these mechanical things, then humanity had a chance. So you wanted to hit first, right? If not, you were grounded and you were out of the war, at least until you got another XT7. So that's the way that worked. The action sequences totaled maybe 3 minutes of an episode. That was the requirement. Then there were the videos that came out, Raid on Volcania, and things like this, training, so that you could be really good in your XT7 before the next episode. And that worked the same way. You would try to hit, not be hit. Then there would be other merchandise that came out, the action figures, the lunch boxes, the other magazines. After the show, actually, there was a series of comic books, activity books, even coloring books for the little brother or sister. So you had several things there to buy that actually went with Captain Power. But the XT7, the most important thing. Okay. So here you have this story about humanity getting trampled, essentially, where people were living scared of their shadows. There were many instances where Captain Power would try to find some of the remaining humans who were, camped out somewhere, trying to stay away from the biodreads. And you'd see them living in little tents or in the ruins of a building, out the areas that were shadowed and best hidden, cowering, frightened humans, right? Because they really had nowhere to go and no way to speak for themselves. Ironic, considering the way the story of Captain Power actually played out, which was a real kind of dystopian story, really about rights being under attack. It wasn't long after Siskel and Ebert said, everybody's got to watch this show, this is amazing. They're doing some really subversive stuff here, some really neat stuff, that the first attacks came. And the weird thing is, it was, Captain Power was the target of both the left and the right for very different reasons. But for once, groups found a common cause that they could rally around. The left didn't like the show because you bought toys with it. Now, the irony of the fact that the people who were leading this protest had probably grown up watching The Lone Ranger, where they could buy bows and arrows and guns and headdresses and masks and board games and puzzles, and I can just go on and on. That didn't matter. This was on the heels of concerns about children's educational shows having advertisements in them, commercials. But this was obviously a very different thing. No school was showing Captain Power, although it wouldn't hurt if they had. But their problem was that there was this interactive game technology. On CNN, Peggy Charon of Action for Children's TV said, and I'm quoting, "To really watch the show the way it's designed to be watched, you have to go out and buy something to use with the program. That is the height of arrogance." So their criticism was, there's stuff to go with it, right? The response from Landmark Entertainment was, our ratings keep going up. The critics keep saying positive things about us, and we know, because we're looking at the royalties, that only a very small fraction of people are actually buying the toys. The only reason people are watching this is because of the stories. If that weren't the case, our ratings would be plummeting, and we'd be off the air. The fact was, you could watch the show and completely enjoy it. I did. Aging myself here, I actually put off some dates. Said you have to come back in an hour because Captain Power was on. I didn't have any of the toys up until I was in my 30s and I got to eBay. I thoroughly enjoyed the show. The fact that a couple of the characters in the background had red glowy chests meant absolutely nothing to me. I didn't even make the connection that I was supposed to be, doing something with the little toys that actually connected with. Clearly, the storytelling was at the heart of the series, but the idea that you could buy something and use with it and enhance your experience of it was labeled exploitation of children. And so, from one side, it was said that crass commercialism, really capitalism run amok, has created this unholy union between Mattel and Landmark Entertainment, and clearly we're designing children to be nothing but soulless consumers, and that's why Captain Power should be taken off the air. That's essentially a completely unbiased account of the argument against Captain Power from the left. And I would point out that if any of them had actually watched the show, they would have appreciated the fact you didn't have to have the XT7 to enjoy it. Even more so, though, the right, clearly no one from this particular camp had actually watched the show at all. The argument from the family values side was that this promoted violence. And the problem was, rather than spending quality time sitting around the dinner table with mother and daddy, the child was shooting something and trying to kill something. And you were just going to create a bunch of juvenile delinquents who the next day would be, gangbangers if you allowed your children to take part in this. They wanted to limit TV addiction, and this was just adding to the TV addiction problem. And so, it followed naturally. And this was also a weird moment when there was a group on the left and a group on the right that were working together. This is the Brady Bill and such, anti-gun laws. This was a moment in time where you had Republicans kind of jumping on the on gun regulation as well as the left. So there was all this talk about you're teaching children to play with guns. Okay, go back to the point that it was the Lone Ranger generation that was actually playing with guns. They never took into consideration, first of all, no gun was fired in this show. You were in a ship, first of all. So you weren't aiming a gun. Secondly, you weren't killing anyone. You were saving humanity. Because the opening statement said, all life is precious, right? We are here to protect all life. That's the quote from the opening credits. What you were doing was taking away the power of the machines that were killing people, right? And you could not be killed either. You could just have to leave your ship because your ship was going down. But you get in another ship and go again. There were no deaths in the interactive experience. All there was saving life. But this did not keep them from going on television and saying, you're shooting guns and killing people, and that's why this is bad. So it got to the point where eventually you had people testifying about Captain Power in Senate hearings about children's television. And this was not where J. Michael Straczynski actually wanted to be. And so, eventually, there were fights between Mattel and Landmark about what to do about this dual-prong attack on them. Did this mean they should cut off the marketing end of things, the merchandise? And if so, how would this look for the second season? Actually, it was very interesting for the second season, but I won't go there quite yet. Trying to figure out exactly what to do. Well, they were saved the problem because they were canceled. Despite the multiple awards for which it had been nominated, despite the incredible critical success of the show, all of the buzz in the science fiction community at the time, it was, Starlog did specials on it, everything. They pulled the plug, which put such sort of last-minute thing, put Straczynski in kind of a bad situation. And so, again, going back to the question of whether this was a children's show or an adult show, the last episode, March 27th, 1988, ended up being this incongruous Christmas episode in the middle of March, in which Jessica Steen, pilot Jennifer Chase on the show, the one here on the right, was killed. She basically sacrificed her life to save all of the rest of the soldiers of the future, and it ends on the note of her basically blowing up. And that was the end of Captain Power. Really sad note to kind of go out on there. And incongruous as far as the larger arc was concerned. The larger arc was really kind of interesting. I'm going to skip for a moment to what could have been. The scripts were already written for how this fight would continue. Captain Power had basically fought his way, or gone all the way through the United States, saving these last little pockets of humans here and there. The next thing they were going to do was go up into Canada and find a whole area where their power suits couldn't work because of the way radiation and such had affected the area. And so they were going to have to learn how to do things sort of old school. They were going to use bows and arrows, and they were going to prove that they were significant forces using their brains and not just the technology that they had. And again, show the resilience of the humans, because they were going to fight these mechanical bad guys on their own turf without all of the technological sophistication that their opponents would have, and they would still kind of come out on top. Plus, interestingly enough, there was going to be this artificial intelligence that comes out of the Lord Dread side that was going to be the evil intelligence that was really going to take humanity out forever, except it's intelligent, and it will change sides and actually fight against Lord Dread. So there was going to be all sorts of interesting things going on that we never got to see. The story continued, as you know. Straczynski went on eventually and did Babylon 5 and many other things quite successfully. If you watch some of the episodes of Babylon 5 that are incredibly harsh about merchandising, you may remember, if you've watched that, jokes about the Londo dolls and such in the gift store at Babylon 5. This was in very much a sense of reaction against what he had faced with Captain Power. And his incredible protectiveness of the other stories that he created is also tied up to the fact that he had a lot of hurt coming out of the Captain Power situation. You also see this really innovative, entrepreneurial, exciting experiment in storytelling. Not only the adult content mixed with the childish excitement and packaging, but also the interactive feature. Why aren't we interacting in all kinds of interesting ways with the television series we have now? Well, the first one got shot down in a really hard way. And that ended the question about innovation for several years to come, halted that whole line. Mattel was already doing some experimentation with some other things. People look back and criticize and say, well, that was really rudimentary what they were doing with that. Well, yes, it was, but they were the first ones to do it and put it out there in a way that was seen across the United States and Canada. and as it was exciting people about what the possibilities would be, basically was punished for being a pioneer. And so it really shut down a whole area of inquiry in entertainment and in technology because of the way it was demonized. So it brings up the question whether or not something that kind of goes out on the edge and attempts something new could really face the kind of attacks that Captain Power did. And since this is the 20th, getting ready to be the 20th anniversary of the show, it's sort of a nice question of whether we can be happily self-satisfied that we've come so far or not, if we consider the opportunities we have with our entertainment today and how really thoughtful and subversive they might actually be. So with that, I end my presentation. And I thank you very much for your kind attention tonight and for the opportunity to come once again. Thanks especially to Dolomite for the invitation to come and talk to you at PhreakNIC. Thank you very much. Sorry, thank you very much. I was forgetting my PhreakNIC etiquette there. A lot of the episodes were actually put out on VHS, so you can still get the training videos. If you can also get the Jet XT7 as well, but you can get a lot of the episodes on VHS, eBay and such. But the fan organizations have other means of getting you versions if you're interested. So. Yes, I am only telling you hearsay. I have absolutely no proof that this is the case. But the tapes do show up rather regularly on eBay, the VHS tapes. And not all full 22 episodes are available that way. But Flame Street is, which is the cyberpunk episode that's just really, really interesting. Although this is so early in the game that the actress who talks about the fact that you have to log on, they put it one word, they were being released, and she'd say, Logan, because she wasn't exactly sure what that meant. And so you would Logan to the program, and it was kind of interesting, but had the little jacks in the back of their head and everything. It was quite neat. So, yeah. We'll say the actors in the show, Jessica Steen has gone on to do quite a number of things. She was in Earth 2, which a lot of science fiction people may remember. She was in Homefront, a series about World War II that was on for some time. She shows up all over the place. Peter McNeil, who was a Hawk, who was the sort of father figure of the show, shows up in movies all the time. The most recent one, History of Violence, he was the sheriff in that. He does character actor roles quite well. The actor who played Captain Power, Tim Dunnigan, was the original face in the first episode of the A-Team. He doesn't show up much anymore. I don't think he acts full time anymore. But he was for a time the new, is it Davy Crockett? In the Disney series that was brought back, that redid the old Fess Parker series. Let's see. The character who played Tank, the one who was genetically engineered, is Svenel Thorson, who many people know is the guy who's in all of Arnold Schwarzenegger's movies, because he's best friends with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and he's the stunt man and all of those things. He was also, probably know him if you saw the movie Gladiator. He played the the character who was brought out at the end, who was the only undefeated gladiator and had the great fight scene with Russell Crowe with all of the tigers and everything. Tigris, I think, was his name in that film. And yes, he was in Mallrats. Yes, so he shows up here and there as well. And Maurice Dean Wint I think he does mostly Canadian stage acting now. But anyway, those were the main characters.
The writers or directors connected with Space Above and Beyond?
Oh, that's a good question.
Because Tank being one of the names of the genetically engineered.
Right? That's, I'm not sure who wrote for that, but I wouldn't be surprised if Goddard, the other main writer, and that wasn't involved with that. That's a really, I need to check on that, because that would be a very nice homage kind of thing going on. Yeah, I need to, thank you. That's a good thing to check out. Thanks a lot.
You mentioned one link to Babylon 5 in the name. Is there any other links that show up?
Just some thematic ones. There's the idea of what body is going to sort of mediate for all of these things. So you get very much this UN feeling going on. And thematically, there's also a place, the Passages, which is where everybody's trying to go. Because it's the one place that's safe and it's underground and people are going to be spirited away there and everything will be fine. And then you find out that there's things that are going on in these sanctuaries that actually are abuse of power and are creepy and such. And so there's this political intrigue within political intrigue. But you can see a lot of those kind of things being worked out. I think, to my knowledge, the only overt one was the fact that that colony that went bad, that Tank escaped from, was Babylon 5. Yeah, it's definitely, you can see the way his mind worked kind of playing out and all of that. Also, some other writers who wrote some of the episodes that later went on to write other things, both in adult television and children's shows. It was obviously a training ground for some young folks of real talent. So, and a lot of the scripts are actually available online from the writers. So, including scripts that were never actually shot for the second season. And Straczynski has actually gone through and mapped out how the arc would have played out over the 4 seasons, which is really remarkable, interesting stuff. So we kind of know what would have happened. Besides, we also have scripts for the second season that just never got shot. So.
Quick tech question. Have you tried your XT7 with the VHS or other tapes to see if you actually managed to get ejected or whatever?
I have not. I have talked to people who have.
I'm guessing it worked for.
Yes, yes, it did. And they, they got ejected.
Yep.
They're out of the war. But I was, I never actually, keep a cherry in the box, man.
How much massaging did the last episode get? You mentioned one of the main characters. Yeah.
Right.
How much do you know? How much they altered it just to try and wrap things up on the last minute? Or?
They really didn't get to. It was left with this hanging moment of they didn't get to and they just didn't try. I think there was a combination there. They knew at that point that they were canceled, but they had it was incredibly moving ending. And you could already see hints of the fact that Captain Power was going to go from being this sort of wide-eyed Galahad, gee whiz, my father wanted me to do this, let's go fight, guys, to being a really dark character who was out for revenge, who would have to be reined in by these other characters, and really show this, we're trying to save humans, but darn it, I'd like to kill something. But that's not what we're about, that I really want to kill something sort of thing. This shadow, you see it just for a moment, but it ends with you saying it, and part 2 is where, and it's just not there. So it's a very abrupt ending, and stark. I mean, for a death scene in a children's show, it's violent. In relation to the fact that this character had been one of the most important characters in the show, and she deserved this really climactic, heroic, bloody end. So it was very powerful, but then it just ends. It's very abrupt. So there was not closure at all.
But having not seen it, didn't have a television ring that phase. It sounds like they had really good character development for the interaction amongst the characters in the core group.
Yes.
Okay.
And a lot of it tied into, there were moments where, for example, Tank was concerned about if he had lost his human, if he was really human, if he had been created rather than born, and was he being too aggressive and these sorts of things. And moments where, you know, Hawk was missing his family and thinking he really didn't have anything to fight for, maybe he should stop. And moments where, you know, Scout was saying, everything's already been taken away from me, so, you know, here I am. But the main development was over Pilot the girl, because they had taken her as a teenager away from this dread youth that was teaching them that everything human was to be ashamed of. You were trying to be the machine. And she was supposed to basically find other humans and digitize them. And so all of the characters contributed something to her learning about what it meant to be human, by showing her different facets of the human experience and showing her that, yes, this life that she'd been born into was worth preserving. And at the end, you realize that she's not only come full circle, where she wants to find other dread youth and bring them out of this and show them this, you know, false teaching that they've been given, but she's also kind of fallen in love with Captain Power. So the last thing she says is, "I love you, and I'm going to blow up this entire base so the technology doesn't get into the wrong hands." Again, good technology, or, you know, technology is amoral, but if it falls into the wrong hands, this great stuff we have can be awful. And so, I love you, and then, you know, boom. So, the fantastic thing about that scene, though, is you don't just see his reaction, you see all of the characters' reactions to her death, which, again, since the whole first season had been about each of them showing her different parts of humanity, you get to see them grieve in different ways. So, very, very interesting stuff. I mean, they really accomplished a lot in the writing for, you know, 22 episodes.
I vaguely recall the toy line from the Sears catalog when I was a little kid.
Yes.
And I seem to recall, I could be making this up in my head because it's been so long. Was there also a Black Jet, or were there any plans for developing more interactive toys?
There were. And to be honest, I don't remember what all of them were, but I know that they were carried in the Sears catalog, and that's also where they carried the VHS tapes of the episodes. There was more than one ship that was being created, but I don't know what the others were. I'm sorry. And I also don't know. I do know they were creating different things in hopes for the second season that never got off the ground. There you go. There you go. And if the suction cup sticks to the television screen, you can say, "I got me one," right? There you go. I wish I knew more about that, and I'm sorry. I don't. But that information is out there. And there's a good website, one of the fan websites, that documents all of the merchandise that had ever been. In fact, even the Wikipedia page has great pictures of the different merchandise that was available, still in the package. You know, just it's available out there. I just offhand don't know, and I'm sorry about that. But it's a great question. Thanks.